therapists are taught that they should have a neutral spine. You should have a neutral spine. I was getting people from around the world, they were writing me, but athletically, I'm sorry, I'll be direct, but neutral spine athletically is the biggest load of horse shit I've ever heard in my life. You can't run with neutral spine. You can't throw with neutral spine. You can't climb with neutral spine. I can't swim. I can't do anything with a neutral spine except lay in a box, dug in a hole, and they get ready to bury me. I mean, that's the only thing I can do with it. There's nothing athletically I can do with a neutral spine. So we know just automatically to produce athletes, we're not going to do a neutral spine. One of the things that'll always be come up is, the McGill experiments where they would take connective tissue from a pig cadaver and put it under such and such amount of strain. And if we put it in this position with this much load, it snaps. Okay. And everyone runs around and it's the sky is falling. Oh my God. Don't bend your spine. Stay neutral. What everyone kind of missed, the big elephant in the room, was the pig was fucking dead. The tissue was dead. It can't adapt. It's dead. It's no longer living. And it wasn't exposed to very gradual loads so that there could be progressive adaptation, which is what our bodies are really good at. So they kind of overlooked all that. So if I take this completely unprepared tissue and I do this to it, it'll break. So some very interesting discussions right now. And obviously everyone's fine. We've got athletes doing great, adults who are doing wonderful, and the physical therapist will come around simply because it's healthy.
Despite the research that's out there, there are people who have alternative opinions. And I wanted to get your thoughts on a exercise, I guess you could call it, that's called the Jefferson curl. The argument that people will make with the Jefferson curl is there a dosage where you can actually make yourself basically toughened up against getting a disc bulge? Like if you were to dose it at the correct amount, given sort of the, how quickly the body could adapt to the stress. Do you think that's something that is possible or not?
No, the science doesn't support that at all. There have been a few studies on disc gristling and toughening the disc through flexion exercises, and the only evidence that supports it's even a possible mechanism is done on occupational groups like coal miners, for example. Coal miners who start when they're 15 and 16 down in the coal mines have shown some ability to toughen the disc in flexion, but it takes several years. The idea that you toughen the disc over a year or so of doing loaded flexion exercises has no support at all. In fact, every study that I know of has only shown cumulative damage occurs. But as I said, the rub of it all is the lifter or the athlete gets no signal from their body that the collagen is delaminating because it delaminates from the inside out. And they may be toughening muscle. There's no question that the Jefferson curl would target the multifidus part of the erector spinae complex because it's involved in segmental rolling. But as far as actually toughening the disc, there's no science that I know of that says that occurs over a period of a year or two. It takes many years, and it's like building bone to protect against osteoporosis. You can do it when you're 15, but it's not certainly something I would suggest 15-year-olds do. There are better ways to achieve the goals.
I can give you examples with, as you'll probably know from the DVDs, I do a number of consults with these terrific, the UFC athletes and the MMA fighters and whatnot. Yeah. Now, they're a special breed because, first and foremost, you need a very developed abdominal wall to survive. In other words, it's armor. Mm-hmm. So you build the abdominal wall that protects your visceral organs against the kicks and punches that would otherwise rip you apart inside. Mm-hmm. So traditionally in martial arts, they've been doing 1,000 sit-ups a day. A lot of them become flexion intolerant. They build up so much trauma in their discs that they can't train anymore. not because of the damage in a fight, but because of the crazy way of them training. So we've taken out all of the flexion movement, and the MMA people are interesting because they practice a form called jiu-jitsu, which requires a lot of spine flexion movement to bring the thighs and the hips right up over in front of their face to execute some of the submission holds, for example. Yeah. Well, there have been some real top level UFC fighters who have become flexion injured. They can't train that way. And yet, if you go to the top trainers, and I'm not talking about people who have opinions on the internet, I'm talking about people who create top level fighters. They will tell you that in adopting our approaches, taking out some of the flexion movement under load exercises returns the resilience in their fighters, and they have to save the real flexion motion for the octagon or for the ring, and that's how they salvage their careers.
Right.
And again, it irritates me a little bit when I read these people chatting away on the internet that, you've got to have a lot of flexion-based, and I'm talking flexion movement in programs because people do that in real life. Well, then I ask them, really, how many backs have you salvaged, and how many of those people were in the last Olympics?
Sure.
Because I'll compare my numbers with anybody on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's a lot of mythology, and I don't think they've done their homework in understanding this cumulative trauma scenario.
Sure. So just to sort of, I maybe summarize in my head, and hopefully for some of the listeners as well. You were talking about they train without the spinal flexion before the event, so they're able to be stronger in the event. So they're in a sense they're able to use spinal flexion. So
exactly. They put money in the bank. Yeah.
So it's as if they're building a foundation underneath spinal flexion, so it's allowed in a way to kind of happen. Does that sort of summarize it?
Well worded, sir.
If I go a year and have a body weight Jefferson curl for 3 sets of 10 and it feels great, all I know is that it didn't hurt me. I don't necessarily
you don't even know if it wasn't. Maybe it didn't hurt you
it.
yet. Maybe it didn't even get to the point yet.
Yeah.
Because disc herniations are they're a slow, long kind of process usually.
So all this experiment for me is doing is just starting the conversation. Maybe we're just thinking about this whole training thing all wrong. Maybe the only injury mechanism is shitty training.